Craig is eating a pretzel right now, and I push Facebook Live record. So
she wasn't supposed to push the button.
I apologize for not being on time this morning. So that is why our video is late today. It's all me, nothing with him. We'll pretend anyway.
Whoa.
I took the blame. Hi everybody. Sorry we're late this morning. Oh,
I'm still eating pretzel.
So we are going to get right into stuff, I guess, since Craig needs a drink to wash down that pretzel stick.
Gosh, I could use a glass of water.
And today we're going to do the top 5 tips for negotiating this morning.
Let me do my job there.
Obviously, I don't normally say the intro as I'm stumbling all over that.
You didn't do the whole, hi, I'm Craig, I'm Nicole. You didn't do that whole thing and pretend like I messed the names up?
Yeah,
All right, well, good. Let's get right into it. Let's get some negotiating tips, some of our favorites. Let's see. Number 5.
Number 5, we said, is to break down numbers sometimes for the buyer or the seller, either way. So for the seller, it might be like a $2,000 off their bottom line, but for the buyer, it could only be like $10 for their payment. So sometimes when you get, I think the most frustrating part of negotiation is when you guys are like $2,000 apart or $1,000 apart, and now it's just down to more of an emotional thing than it is more of a business, so to try to negotiate through that.
Yeah, sometimes I think they just need to put it into perspective. It's like $300,000 house or $2,000 away. Both sides, dig in and say, hey, I'm not budging. And it's like, guys, sometimes to the seller, they might have a mortgage they have to pay. They have expenses, commission, tax credits, all that kind of stuff. But to a buyer, it might only be, $10 a month in their payment right now with interest rates so low. And I've seen buyers get so bent out of shape about that, but then we'll look at another house down in a different neighborhood where taxes are higher. And the payment's gonna be $30 a month different for the same pretty much same house. So it's crazy.
And I think the same goes for sellers too, because I think sometimes the sellers get stuck on like home warranty or survey, which are really small expenses in the overall scheme of things. So it's really good to just make sure you're showing either party numbers.
Yeah. Sometimes you just gotta break the numbers down. And people like that. Okay, so let's move on to our number 4 tip: negotiating commission with sellers. This one I think is always important. I think especially as there's so much competition out there right now, a lot of times, and I used to work for sale by owners pretty much exclusively, but when you're out there with one of them, they'd say, well, so-and-so will do it for cheaper than you will, Craig. And I would always tell them, what scares me about that is the commission is kind of the realtor's value in the transaction, in my opinion. And I would tell the seller this, and this worked all the time. I would say, hey, look, if that's my value in the transaction, if I can't fight for my own value in the transaction and get what I feel is a fair commission for me, how confident are you going to be that I'm going to be able to fight for your asking price? If I roll over on my own value and just say, yeah, fine, we'll do it as low as you want, that I'm going to do the same thing when another agent sends me an offer on your house, and then I'm going to be like, oh, well, we were asking $300, but this $220 looks great, thanks for the offer, So I don't know. I think a good agent that asks for a fair commission is usually going to be a lot better, especially if they fight for that commission, and they're going to fight for your price just as hard.
Well, I think what Craig's trying to say is make sure that you are stating your value proposition to the seller, right? So I think as realtors, we all do different things, and, obviously we set our commission based on, what we feel our worth is or whatnot. And I think you definitely need to be prepared to sell your value proposition and show why you're worth what you're asking for.
Right. Yeah. I was just trying to distract you.
It didn't work.
All right.
He really wants to eat that pretzel stick. The second one is so bad.
Right she was telling me that pretzel's going to stare at me the whole show. I'm like, it's staring at me. Okay, so we're going to move on to our 3rd tip. 3rd tip is negotiating with buyers. I think one good tip, especially, we have a lot of buyers coming over from Illinois buying in Indiana. And the Illinois market is not the same as the Indiana market. So
by far. Yeah,
in Illinois, they're negotiating a lot more on contracts, where in Indiana it's like basically a 98% sales price or listing price to sales price. So it's very tight in Indiana. Illinois, they'll come, a new buyer from Illinois, a lot of times they're told, hey, offer 10% less. That just doesn't work over here.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes you have to put the buyer into the seller's shoes and say, hey, if you're asking 300, I mean, if you had a house for sale for 300,000, would you take 250,000? And usually the answer is no. So sometimes you can help do that. What do you think? Working with buyers, you do a lot of buyers, right?
Yeah, I think what you have to remember is just to try to help the buyers take emotion out of it and really break down the numbers. When you're doing your comps, that you are adjusting for properties based on, to make sure that those homes are as close as you can get to your property, so your pricing structure for them shows what the property is actually worth, right? And in the end, this is what I always tell. Sometimes I think the buyers right now, because of how the market is and whatnot, they're just really picky right now. And you really have to, sometimes they have to lose a property or two to really understand what the market's like. And that's what we found a lot with buyers at this point in time. So, yeah.
That's good. Good tip. Yeah. Good tip, Nicole. It's a pro tip right there.
Right.
All right. To our second to last tip here. Don't overplay your hand and don't show your hand too early. Now this happens too frequently.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
I've typically represented a lot more sellers than I have buyers, and I cannot tell you, it's a scary amount of times where an agent would send me an offer and I would just ask them, hey, why is it so low or something like that, and they would say something along the lines of, oh, Craig, just get me a counter offer. My buyer knows that they're not going to take this. And it's like, unless you have that in writing, technically you just violated your fiduciary responsibility to your client. So that's dangerous.
Yep.
If someone tells me that, it's my duty to tell my client that. So I have to tell my buyer or my seller that. And even if my seller was desperate and was willing to take the offer, it's almost now they're going to counter it because they know that. So it's one of those things. Don't show your hand too early.
And I think what you have to remember is there's really no secrets, right?
Yeah.
Because remember, your responsibility is to whichever party you're representing. So anything that the other agent tells you is fair game to pass off. There is no hey, don't tell this and whatever. That's not how it works, and that's not good. Negotiating practice, ethics, all that kind of good stuff. So
no, and then I've had this too. Don't overplay your hand. If your buyer will go a little bit higher or something like that, don't make a big thing to the listing agent about how firm your buyer is and they're not going to go up or whatever, because if you only get caught with that once, no matter what. If you overplay your hand and you get caught, that's it. I mean, that other agent's going to know that they can't trust anything that you say, and that's not a good thing. You should always be honest, and you don't have to say everything, but don't be misleading and things like that, because that can only hurt you in the long run.
Well, I think that kind of rolls us into number one, which is watch what you say. You cannot say things. Remember, you have to be really careful of negotiating. Telling the list agent that the buyer has a family or kids or something like that. Like race, religion. Exposing any of that could hurt your negotiation tactics in general, because that's EEOC stuff that you guys aren't supposed to be sharing with the other agent. So
fair housing violation.
Yep. So that's a big one. We tend to hear, blah, 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 things that we shouldn't hear, or, we have an offer, but it's, this, and things like that. All kinds of things that we shouldn't be hearing that we do. So, I mean, the crux of that is watch what you say. Remember, go back to the ethics that we all just had to take this year. Go back to remembering what you can and cannot say to each other.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
I feel like that was kind of a Debbie Downer to the end of number one. What the heck?
How can we do watch what you say on a positive note? Well, I think also listen very intently to what the other party is telling you, because sometimes
that's a good positive.
Yeah, there we go. Because sometimes you can get something that let's say I've had a case before where the seller was willing to give a better deal to the buyer if the buyer was willing to give them a little possession time after closing, because maybe the seller was a little nervous about the transaction, or maybe they're scared. They've been in the house for 20 years, and it's a big deal for someone moving. They're moving across states. They have to get all their stuff, all that kind of stuff. Their family grew up in that house, or they lived there for 20. I mean, it's kind of a big deal sometimes.
Yeah, or maybe they'll pay for possession if they get it for a little bit longer. I've had people do that. They want to spend their last Christmas in their house or whatnot. Would the buyer be willing to work with them? Sometimes you can get lower price or extra money or whatnot. So definitely, I think listening is also going into, watching what you say too.
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. Be in the moment. Pay attention. Listen to the other agent. Ask questions. All that good stuff.
Yeah. I agree.
She agrees. All right, there you have it. I think that's it. I think this might be the show today.
I think that wraps it up. Again, apologize for being late. Thanks for the people that watched anyway.
I accept your apology.
We will, whatever. And we will make sure we're on time next week.
And I will eat this pretzel.
All right, thanks guys. Have a good week.